Aloha mai kako, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Troy Andrade, and on behalf of the Hawaii State Bar Association's Civic Education Committee, the King Kamehameha V Judiciary History Center, PBS Hawaii, and the William S. Richardson School of Law, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you to today's special conversation with award-winning filmmaker Kimberlee Bassford. Here in Hawaii, January 30th is set in law as Civil Liberties and the Constitution Day. It is a day that we remember and celebrate heroes like Fred Korematsu, Min Yasue, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Mitsuye Endo, who stood up against Japanese-American internment during World War II and really took a stand for equality in the United States. This year, we've chosen to spend our Civil Liberties and the Constitution Day celebrating one of our own, our Maui-born Congresswoman who fought adversity at every step of her journey and paved a path of equity for all of us. But today is special for another reason. Over the course of the next few months, the University of Hawaii, in conjunction with partners throughout the community, like the Bar Association and the Judiciary History Center and many more, will celebrate the 50th anniversary of Title IX, the federal law that prohibits discrimination in federal funding on the basis of sex, which was co-authored by the woman we have chosen to celebrate today, our very own Patsy Mink. Today's special conversation is our official kickoff event for this wonderful series of programming, highlighting the role of Title IX and Patsy Mink in bringing about a better society. And we are so glad and honored that you're able to join us today, because we know that this will be time well spent. Before we jump into our conversation, I'd like to recognize and thank Matt Matisse, Brianna Govea, and Keahe Davis from the Judiciary History Center for their extraordinary help to put this program together. I'd also like to thank PBS Hawaii for broadcasting the wonderful documentary Patsy Mink Ahead of the Majority on their stations and online for the entire world to see until February 10th. We hope you will be able to watch the broadcast if you haven't done so already. For those of you that are joining us via Zoom, you will find at the bottom of your screen a Q&A function that you can submit questions to our speaker. Please, throughout the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them. And both myself as moderator, along with my co-moderator, will get to as many of those questions as we can throughout our time together. It is now my pleasure to pass the virtual microphone over to my colleague and friend, Ruth O. Ruth is an attorney and longtime supporter of civics education. She is co-chair of the Bar Association's Civic Education Committee and a commissioner on the Supreme Court's Commission to Promote and Advance Civic Education. Please join me in welcoming Ruth to introduce our featured speaker.
Aloha, Troy. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be co-moderating this program on Civil Liberties and the Constitution Day in Hawaii. And to everyone joining us, welcome to our celebration and conversation on Patsy Mink and her powerful legacy. It is my honor to introduce our special guest, Kimberlee Bassford, who is an independent documentary filmmaker from Hawaii. Kim's documentary production company in Honolulu is called Making Waves Films, and her filmmaking is committed to shining light on underrepresented stories of girls and women. Kim graduated from Punahou School. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from Harvard University and a Master of Journalism from the University of California, Berkeley. Kim is the director, producer, and writer of the documentary Patsy Mink, Ahead of the Majority. Her documentary has received many prestigious awards and has been broadcast on Comcast's Cinema Asian America, PBS, and PBS Hawaii, and many other stations. This documentary has even been screened at the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education and at many universities and other organizations, too many to mention. The list is long, but to mention just a few awards, Kim's timeless documentary has garnered audience awards at numerous film festivals, Best Documentary by Honolulu International Film Festival, Epic Emerging Artist Finalist by the White House Project, and Best Historical Documentary by San Francisco Women's Film Festival. More than a decade after the film's premiere and after many screenings across the nation, through the intelligent lens of filmmaker Kim Bassford, Audiences of all ages are learning and relearning more correctly the full story of Patsy Mink and her legacy. During Patsy's lifetime, sadly, many people, even here in Hawaii, may have misunderstood what she was all about without ever knowing what an extraordinary public servant and leader she was. Even I, who respected Congresswoman Mink greatly and had opportunities to meet her and to be encouraged by her during the 1990s and early 2000s, I wish I had known more, and I'm so grateful that Kim made this film. So through open conversations about advancing civic engagement on many of the issues that Patsy Mink was both a national and local leader, we hope our audience, you, can be moved to share this documentary with friends, classmates, colleagues throughout your communities. Also, we hope our audience will be inspired to keep in touch and stay engaged in more conversations with us about our responsibilities to shine light and find ways to work together in finding effective solutions and pathways for ensuring opportunities, equity, and justice for all people. Kim, we greatly appreciate this chance to talk story with you and to learn more about your inspiration, process, and experience in creating your breakthrough documentary on the story of Patsy Mink. So our first question to you is, why did you want to make a film about Patsy Mink? What was it about her and her story that inspired you?
Well, great. Well, first of all, hi, everybody who has joined us today. And thank you so much, Troy and Ruth, for inviting me to have this conversation with you. It's quite a thrill since the film came out 14 years ago. And of course, you know, when I was working on it, I wasn't thinking 14 years in the future that we'd still be screening it and talking about it. But of course we should be, because as you said, Patsy Mink's story is still being discovered by people. And I remember when I first discovered her story, it was sadly actually when she had passed away. So it was in 2002. I was at that time a graduate student at UC Berkeley studying journalism. And I remember reading online the newspaper stories from the Advertiser and Bulletin about Patsy Mink's death. And, you know, there are a couple of things that really struck me. Well, the first thing was that she was such a trailblazer. Having grown up here in Hawaii, I of course knew her name. I knew she was our longtime Congresswoman, but I didn't know that she was the very first woman of color in Congress. And as a woman of color myself, that was something that really struck me, that, wow, you know, first of all, we don't have, you know, the representation of women in Congress that we should have, and definitely not women of color, but that Patsy Mink was the very first. And what must that have been like for her as that trailblazer? So that was the first thing. And then as I started reading more of the articles about her life, you know, I was struck by the fact that she ran for president of the United States. In 1972, she was a Democratic primary candidate in the state of Oregon, running on a peace platform. So that was like amazing because, you know, like we still sadly today have not had a woman serve as a president of the United States, but that Patsy Mink did this, you know, she put her name forward in 1972. And then of course, the thing that really got me was that she was the co-author of Title IX, which is legislation that I directly benefit from. You know, at the time I was a graduate student, and Title IX's, you know, I think most people think of it in the realm of athletics. But of course, you know, Patsy's intent really was to open up academics and higher education for women. And I'm a beneficiary, you know, having, you know, I was in graduate school, like I said. So it was just amazing that I didn't know that she even had a part in this legislation. It's like, why didn't I know this about her growing up in Hawaii? Why don't more girls in Hawaii know this about her? And I was just really, you know, taken with her story. So that's where the idea sort of just came about. It was like, wow, here's this amazing woman, you know, definitely somebody should do a film on her. I didn't necessarily think it would be me, because at the time I was working on my first project in graduate school and working on a documentary. And it really wasn't until I came home a couple of years later, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my first project outside of school. And that is when I kind of started revisiting the idea of Patsy and her story. So that's where it began.
So I'm going to jump in because, you know, you had mentioned that you were, you know, looking at some articles. I teach at the law school and we do a ton of research here. What was your process in researching Patsy's life, and what sort of resources did you get your hands on?
Yeah, sure. So, it started, like I said, just reading newspaper articles and then just kind of Googling and trying to find as much as I could about her. I forgot to mention it wasn't just the fact that she was a trailblazer and was involved in all these, pieces of legislation that I believed in, but that I was also really interested in her brand of politics. I was still kind of, in my early 20s, sort of forming what I thought about, politics and whatnot. And in Patsy, I really saw somebody who seemed to see government and the role of elected officials is really representing the people, which obviously it should be, but you don't always think that. And also, she just really seemed like she was like a true servant of the people. And that she saw government in a real sort of optimistic way that like it can help change people's lives for the better. It can improve society for the better. And I found that really refreshing. But in any case, I read as much as I could about her. I found a couple of longer kind of format pieces on her. So I actually found in a UH Law School journal a sort of like mini biography about her. I think the article was like early women lawyers from Hawaiʻi, and it was profiled, and that was actually really helpful resource. And then I also ended up going to through the libraries, and at the University of Hawaii Library, I found a dissertation that had been written on Patsy, I think in the 1970s. So that dissertation plus the kind of mini biography in the law school journal were sort of the longest pieces that I could find. Actually, there was a young adult book that had also been written about her called Heart in Politics. So surprisingly, there hadn't been a lot written yet, like beyond just like, little short magazine stories. And so then I started having to kind of talk to people. But I tried to do as much research as I could. And then I decided to reach out to Patsy Mink's daughter, Gwendolyn Mink, who was a professor at Smith College. And so I was able to find her email address. And I just kind of wrote to her and said, I'm really interested in your mother's story. It'd be possible to meet. And I didn't realize it, but she was actually in Hawaii at the time, spending time with her father, John Mink, Patsy Mink's husband. So they invited me over. And so I had a chance to meet with them and talk to them about my interest. And that's sort of where the project really began, once I met the family and I had their blessing.
Awesome.
So Kim, how, as you were gathering all of this information, did you decide what to include in the film and what not to include?
Yeah, that is always a hard thing to do. It's a challenge because there's no way you can condense someone's, 74 years into an hour film. It's just impossible. And first I just did as much research as I could. And I was also starting to think of who the audience for the film was. I did intend the film to have a national PBS broadcast. And so I knew my audience was always more of a national audience is what I was trying to reach. So that kind of helped guide a little bit of what issues I wanted to highlight and what parts of her story I wanted to dive into. So yeah, kind of like that being part of it. But, it was hard. There were a lot of things I didn't include in the film that I wish I could have. But it's, you only have 56 minutes. So you had to make some hard decisions. Part of it also was kind of what archival could we find to help tell her story? So part of the research process was just looking for as much material that existed about Patsy Mink and also visual material. Since she had already passed away, I couldn't go out and interview her myself. So I was really trying to find whatever video interviews existed. And luckily there were a few, and you see them throughout the film, but another local filmmaker named Tom Kaufman had interviewed Patsy Mink. Actually, I think it was about the Japanese Cultural Center. And so he had an hour-long interview and that he was able to share that with me. I also found an interview that the Center for Labor Education and Research had done here in Hawaii with her. So it was kind of like those were the two big long interviews and then like little bits and pieces here and there. But really in a way, the archival record sort of drove a little bit what story we told.
So what were some of the other challenges you faced in putting this film together?
Yeah, well, definitely just, sifting through all the material and figuring out what to focus on. And then definitely fundraising is always an issue in independent documentary filmmaking. So it took about 2 years from the moment I met with the Mink family to just do kind of the research and the initial fundraising so that I would have enough funds to actually start filming. And so, yeah, that's a pretty lengthy period of time, although in retrospect, it wasn't. I've done documentary films that have taken longer than the 4 years it took me to make this one. But definitely the fundraising and then, researching her life for sure. And then once we had all the funding in place, then production actually didn't take too long. It was a lot of interviews. We filmed on Oahu, on Maui, and in Washington, D.C. And then besides the interviews, we filmed some sort of evocative reenactments on Super 8 film. And we did that both on Maui and on Oahu. So yeah, that overall, the filming itself didn't take very long, but the editing and then of course the research and development beforehand were sort of the lengthier phases of the production.
What messages did you want to convey to your audience other than trying to appeal to a national audience? I was very intrigued by the different views of Patsy by people who worked with her.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of things, I wanted to sort of get at what was driving her, like she was obviously a fighter and sort of show that, she wasn't necessarily just born that way. It was these experiences early on in life where basically, and I love it in the film poster. I think I have the tagline, everyone told her no, so she rewrote the rules. And so, the whole early part of her life is like a lot of people telling her no. I mean, I guess not really early on, really early on, her parents were just so supportive of both her and her brother, and they treated her and her brother equally. They didn't treat her any differently because she was a girl. But, once, she was going to school and things like that, she was having all these roadblocks in her way. And so I think I wanted to show that, she had a lot of challenges, but then she was able to channel that into, changing, writing legislation that would change things for us. So in the film, I tried to show both, what led her into politics and then sort of her impact once she was in politics. But it was hard, it's like you're trying to tell the story and highlight, her political accomplishments, but also try and get a sense of the woman behind, all of the legislation. And so we did try and talk to a lot of different people. So we interviewed, her family, of course, and then colleagues in Congress, as well as colleagues in more of the state government, and tried to really reach out to folks on both sides. So, definitely Democrats, but we tried to get more Republicans in the film. And I think there's a few, but it was actually a little bit difficult to get some of them to do interviews on camera. And then her staffers too. So try and show, the different parts of her.
So I'm gonna ask a question from the audience that came in that I think is actually a really great question for this moment right now. Talking about the difficulties in getting access to some of the research materials. If you could personally ask Patsy Mink in an interview with her one question, Kim, what would that question be to Patsy Mink?
I don't know. I think it would have something to do with, just her resilience and like, I don't know, why did she keep going? I think it's so easy to see that from the outside. Like she was so resilient, but, she had a lot of setbacks. Like I said, I think the first really big one was that she didn't get into medical school. And that's really what, ever since she was 4 years old, she had dreams of being a doctor, and she did well in school, and she studied, zoology and science and all of these things. And then to apply to more than a dozen medical schools and not get into any of them, I think that was crushing. But then, she kind of picked herself back up and applied to law school. Kind of the same thing if you fast forward when she's already involved in politics and she wanted to, serve in the US House for the first time, and she runs, and then or she files, and then Senator Inouye decides that he's going to drop down from the Senate race and run for the House. This is in 1959 after Hawaii achieved statehood, and then she loses, and just like, you know, she's just crushed by Inouye. And I think that's another time in her life where she was like questioning herself. And I think I would just want to know is like, what made her like jump back in, you know, like, what was it? I don't know. I don't know. I haven't like framed the specific question, but like, what keeps somebody going? Because I think we can all relate. I mean, I think that's what I wanted to bring out in the film, because it's really hard to relate to. Oh, most of us can't really imagine what it's like to be in Congress, right? But we know what it's like to have setbacks and not, you know, to fail. And the fact that, you know, she did fail several times. She had campaigns where she didn't win. She ran for mayor, ran for governor, and she didn't win, right? So I love just celebrating her, but also just like in those low moments, you know, when you're questioning yourself, when you're questioning, like, you know, people, you know, if you should be in office and all of that, like what kept her going? I think that'd be the question I'd want to know.
That is great. That is awesome. And it's a nice, I think, transition into a quick screening of some of the outtakes that never made it into the documentary itself, but that, you know, you think would be great to share with our audience.
Okay, yeah, we do have a couple of clips that I selected that I'd love to share with you all, because like I said, we had hours and hours of footage and a lot of it didn't make it into the final film. So I think this first clip is made up of several clips, but it's all relating to sort of the status of women and girls and sort of women's rights. So just bear with me as I get the clip up on the screen.
It was very difficult getting into school and getting into the professions. I couldn't find a job. And when all of my contemporaries at home say, oh my goodness, what you've done to politics at home, and, you know, wish we had never heard of Patsy Mink, I'll say, well, it's because of all of your attitudes that drove me into politics. If you'd given me a job when I came home from law school, I would have been very happy just drawing a paycheck each month. When Patsy Mink first entered Congress in 1965, one of 11 women were not easily allowed into the congressional dining rooms. They were not allowed in the congressional gym. There were no restrooms for them anywhere near House chambers when they had to go to vote. So we might say that the atmosphere was not woman-friendly. The women in Congress had to fight, literally, to be able to get a women's lounge where they could meet and talk with one another. They had to fight to be able to get on committees that were important for their own constituencies. Patsy Mink served on the Education and Labor Committee, which was absolutely crucial because those were issues she prized so deeply. She finally, with seniority, gained access to the Budget Committee, which is one of the most powerful committees in the House of Representatives. So women had to fight their way in. They had to fight for equal treatment. And what many women report experiencing is a kind of sexism that is subtle, that involves being patronized, that involves not being treated as an equal intellect, an equal strategist, an equal leader, but constantly being treated as if you're just a pretty face. Patsy Mink experienced this problem in part because she was a short person. She was a very beautiful woman. They were racializing her, treating her as exotic, as oriental, playing on stereotypes, expecting her to conform to certain peculiar norms of femininity, instead of treating her as a brilliant orator, a party activist, a woman with powerful issue positions. So she had to fight for every inch of territory that she gained.
Patsy Mink and I both felt we were there to represent all women, because when I got elected, there were only like 15 women in Congress, and our voices were just really kind of clamped down. There wasn't even a women's caucus in Congress because about half the women said, I am not just a woman. I never knew what that meant. I've never heard a man say, I am not just a man. So those of us who thought, well, look, we're women and we're proud of it. It was like a hearty little band of 7 or 8 of us. But we felt very strongly that we should be the voice of women and be out there talking about pay equity and talking about the Women's Equal Rights Amendment. And of course, Patsy was terrific with Title IX. My goodness, look at all of these wonderful women athletes we celebrate today. And had Patsy not had the vision to do Title IX, we wouldn't be celebrating them.
This past Congress, the Women's Educational Equity Act, which was a bill that you sponsored and worked very hard for, was recently signed into law. Could you talk about this, the need for this legislation?
Yes, it's always been my belief that no matter how many laws we passed or how many constitutional amendments we were successful in having ratified, that the major problem in any society was the attitudes that people grew up with or were made to believe were sacred traditions of their civilization. And so long as any part of our society adheres to a sexist notion that men should do certain things and women should do certain things, and then begin to inculcate our babies with these notions through curriculum development and so forth, then we'll never be rid of the basic causes of sex discrimination. So the Women's Educational Equity provision, which is designed to provide monies for small groups, institutions, women's organizations, school systems, universities, whatever, to try to grapple with this problem, do some very intensive work in curriculum revision textbooks. Why do all of the women, for instance, in a child's primer have to be pictured as homemakers with aprons on in the kitchen? Never anything very exciting beyond being a nurse. The doctor is always a man. The lawyer, the engineer, the statesman is always a man. And this is the kind of very subtle way in which, in my view, girls and women are discouraged from fulfilling their potential. And so I suppose the purpose of my bill is really to free the human spirit, to make it possible for everyone to achieve according to their talents and wishes.
Originally, it turned out that she was given DES as part of a medical experiment. It was actually a designed experiment where half the women were given DES and half were given a placebo. They were all told it was vitamins. Years later, when all the problems came up, the university realized they had the perfect group to study what the effects were of DES. So they were really writing her to ask her if she would be part of another medical experiment.
You know, it turned out to be the most horrifying situation for a mother to find out that something that you had taken in the hopes that it was beneficial to your child turns out potentially to have a disastrous effect on your child. So, I mean, it was very, very difficult for her to face that. And then, you know, the University of Chicago sort of took the institutional attitude, well, you know, sorry.
At the age of 24, reading the letter, I didn't fully grasp what all of the repercussions of this DES exposure might be. But I certainly perceived the outrage.
This was really the height of injustice, to foist something on somebody that was going to have a dramatic effect on them and their children without consulting them is the essence of choice.
We all spent about 3 weeks in February in Chicago trying the case against the University of Chicago. Ultimately, the university settled the case. They gave the women some money, but the thing that was most important to Patsy and that we got out of the case was that they agreed to give the entire class medical care for anything related to DES and to monitor them for the bad effects of DES for the rest of their lives.
Kim, thanks for sharing those clips. I think well, a couple of things stick out in my mind. Number one is that perhaps her greatest legacy is Title IX and the work that she did to sort of level the playing field. But then there's also these I'm going to say somewhat random, but not really random, little side legacies that she has of making a difference in other areas. Before we get to sort of those conversations, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about Title IX and sort of if you have any additional insight into, why it was that Patsy did this, what perhaps she was trying to accomplish with passing legislation like this.
Yeah, sure. Let me just let people know right now too that a biography on Patsy Mink's life is going to be coming out in April, and it's co-written by Patsy Mink's daughter, Wendy Mink, and Dr. Judy Wu of the University of California, Irvine. She's a professor of Asian American Studies. So for those who are really interested in finding out a lot more details about Patsy Mink's life, I really recommend you get the biography and read it. And I think you can pre-order it, and we'll have links in the chat later. But, yeah, so when doing the research, I did come across a lot of different things about Patsy Mink's life, and I wish I could have put it all in there. And, now 14 years later, I wish maybe there was a way to get the DES in there that I hadn't thought of. But in terms of Title IX, what my understanding is that, Patsy Mink herself, like I mentioned, she really wanted to be a doctor, but it wasn't until her own daughter, Wendy, applied to college, and Wendy was shut out and denied admission because she was a girl. And so when Patsy Mink saw that the same thing that happened to her was happening to her own daughter, it was kind of like, enough is enough. We need to do something about this. We need to create laws to make sure that, there can't be any sex discrimination in schools, particularly schools that receive federal funds. So I think that was part of the impetus, was that, this has gone on far too long. And, I think the fact that Wendy was also experiencing barriers because she was a girl was really that lit the fire under her. But I have a sense that there were other folks in Congress too who are already interested in this issue. So Patsy and Edith Green, they were the ones who co-authored it. And then Birch Bayh was the one who introduced it in the Senate. So, they all sort of worked together on that.
So I'm going to add in one more question that I'm seeing from the Q&A. What would you say is the biggest misconception about Patsy Mink?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I mean, the biggest misconception, I don't know. I feel like she was definitely criticized in her life. There were a lot of people who admired her, but there are a lot of people who criticized her publicly. She was considered like a communist, anti-American, for sort of her wars on like Vietnam and anti-nuclear testing, things like that. And sometimes she was seen as maybe abrasive because she was very assertive and independent. But at the same time, I think, she was a loyal party member in many ways too. And so I guess that's something that people, don't realize. And the Democratic Party really didn't include her in a lot. That would be another question I would ask her, is like, why was she so loyal to the Democratic Party? And I think part of it is she really believed in the ideals, but they were so, especially in those early years. I guess throughout, they really, they didn't support her a lot. And I think that must have been hard, right? Like, she was often an outsider. She had such independent views, but like, for instance, when she decided to run for president in Oregon, it wasn't like she came up with the idea. There were these Oregon peace activists who came to her and asked her to be their candidate. And so she agreed and she launched this campaign. But from my research, what people thought at home of her, they were just like, why is Patsy doing this? She's out for fame. She's out for this. So I'm sorry, kind of losing track of what the question was, but, she often didn't like have the backing of the party in ways I think she should have. And I don't know if that's because she was a woman. I think part of it, and, part of it was that she was really independent, but that said, she was still very loyal to the Democratic Party throughout her life.
Great. I wonder if we can bring up the next clip on
yes,
on politics.
Yeah, so the next series of clips has to do with her approach and attitude toward politics.
I think of Patsy Mink as someone from that generation of progressivism, people like Hubert Humphrey and even Inoue and Matsunaga are also from that same tradition of, they're the children of the Depression. They saw incredible hardship and suffering in this country, and they saw a great president, Franklin Roosevelt, say, it doesn't have to be that way. We can do something about it. We can use our government and our laws to put systems in place to ameliorate human suffering. And this was tied to the greatness of our nation. So the strength and the pride of America was that we won't forget the elderly or the children or the unemployed. We're going to go out and do something about it. We're going to create public health and great public schools and great public universities. People like Patsy Mink believed this, as many in their generation did.
Patsy's whole thing about politics was persuasion. That she always had this faith, even when it wasn't justified, that people were persuadable. And she always appealed to the good side of people, to the good nature of people. She really did believe in the ideal of American politics, rational, practical, that if things were straightforward, good things would follow. And she didn't, if you're a politician and you can survive losing office and you're not in it for the money, that gives you a lot of power. And it gives you a lot of integrity because you don't feel the need to compromise in ways that are not good either for yourself or for the community. And it's not that politicians don't compromise. I mean, the essence of politics in the American system is compromise. The best politicians are able to do that without betraying the principles and ideals that presumably motivated them in the first place.
There was a time when Patsy was running against Spark Matsunaga, and I know that there were some of us who wanted to tell her, that she didn't stand a chance. At that time, Sparky was known to people as the really nice representative who would take people out to lunch. He had a secret, have the dessert with one group, have the salad with another group, have the main course with another group. But Patsy wasn't into that. Patsy was not somebody who, I think, believed in buying votes or buying people's favor. And so I said, Patsy, why are you running against Sparky? I don't think you have a chance. And she said, Marie, I am the better candidate. And I am not running against Sparky to beat him. I think the voters should have a choice. It's about the voters. And that has always meant to me something that personified the belief she had in the political system, which is the candidate is there for the people. And she was there so that the voters had a choice, not that she was there to beat the other candidate.
Well, Patsy often served as kind of the social conscience of the members of Congress, and if she thought they had a wrong position, or especially the leaders, the chairs of the committees or the Democratic leaders, she would go up to them. She wouldn't be afraid to go up there to them and kind of shake her finger at them and say, hey, you're not doing the right thing, or I think you should do this, or don't forget about, this issue. And so, and people respected her for that. But, she did it in a very charming way. She had this ability to sort of, turn on this big smile and kind of, tell people what they're doing wrong, but also kind of, smile at them and tease them a little bit. And they were very charmed by her. And I think people don't know that about her personality. They think of her as this sort of hard knocks person, but she really could kind of turn on the charm and be very personable, particularly with her colleagues. She formed, I think, some real friendships, and people really respected her.
Patsy had tremendous respect for her own point of view, and so she respected how other people regarded their own point of view. She wasn't casual about how she arrived at her conclusions. So she was respectful as to how others did, even if it wasn't in agreement with them. She rarely gave up on anybody, though, and she always, and she would go on the floor and I'd say, Patsy, how can you do this? You go on the floor, you give a very hard-hitting speech, and you're smiling the whole time. No one could take offense at what you say, because it isn't personal with her. It was about the issue. It was never a personal assault on anyone.
Kim, those were really powerful clips. Thank you. My question. You know, it seemed that what they were saying, what so many people were saying in different ways, is that she knew she wasn't going to win, but she stood strongly and just wanted to figure out ways to affect change. And with the presence of women, adding women would matter somehow, and perhaps persuade her colleagues to recognize that it's time to make some change for more women-friendly environments. But my question is, given the toxicity and territoriality of politics today, what can we learn about Patsy Mink and her politics?
Yeah. I mean, I wish she were here, right? I mean, I think she experienced the partisanship in the 90s, right? And I think the film shows that when she returns to Congress for her sort of second tenure, where she was there in the 60s and 70s and then was out of office and then got back in 1990. And, the Republicans had control of Congress, and it was a really difficult environment, and she didn't succeed in a lot of things that she wanted to get done. And the film focuses on welfare reform. And today I feel like politics is even more partisan and whatnot. So, but she kept going, right? So I think we can look to see how she handled the situation. And she realized, like, maybe she's not going to win, but somebody needs to be representing that voice and needs to be making that argument and needs to be trying to hold people accountable and trying to, be that conscience. And she played that role. And of course, she really wanted to change things, but that she believed in the political process and she didn't give up on it. And that she saw, even if you're in the minority and even if you're not going to win the argument, there's value in speaking. And there's value in, trying to persuade your colleagues and just kind of, I guess, keep fighting the good fight. And then the other thing is that she still did it with grace, right? I mean, she was very assertive in many ways. And I think there's congressional members who tell stories about how she would go up to them and like put her finger in their chest and be like, you're not doing this right. And that, I think that was in the film. But as Laura Eford was saying in that clip, she was also very charming. And as Nancy Pelosi was saying, like she would do it with a smile. So it wasn't like attacking. She didn't attack people's character, right? She pointed out why she thought they were wrong, but she didn't attack them. And I think that's sort of what's different today, is that like a lot of times, if you don't believe me, like you just get attacked personally. So yeah.
Have we shared this film with our current members of Congress?
I don't know. I mean, we did have a screening after the film came out in Washington, right, at the Library of Congress. And I can't remember if members of Congress who might have been there or not, but I'm sure, then that was many, many years ago. So I think it would be a great refresher for people to remember folks like Patsy Mink, who stood their ground, but yet did so in a very respectful way.
Yeah, no, it was also great to see, not just in this clip, but also in the documentary, people like Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters, who are still sort of fighting out there, right? And still doing the work that they were fighting for back when they were colleagues with Patsy. So that's really nice. Can we jump into the next
Okay, sure. Yeah, I've got
great.
one more clip to share with people. This is the shortest of the three. So this one is more just kind of things that didn't fit into the other two. They're kind of more just personal insights into Patsy and clips that I really liked. So I'll share those now.
I remember vividly one night she was talking to me about civil rights because we had a bill on the House floor that dealt with liberties of individuals who were being persecuted. And she told me the story about how one time when she was a child during World War II, the US military came in and took her father away. And there she was, a young child, and her father was just taken away from her, and no one knew what was going to happen. Would he end up in a prison? Would he ever come back? No one knew. And this kind of terrified young child trying to come to terms with her father kind of pulled away from her. And you would hear her tell these stories and you get a sense of just how much she had gone through in her life and how that actually affected everything that she did. And those are the moments that you actually felt close to her, that you realized that she wasn't just a politician. There was a whole body of life experiences that really had shaped who she was as a person and why she wanted to help people.
She really taught me a lot about just standing up for what you believe in and not worrying about what other people think. And also about, really understanding that people belong. They belong at the table, no matter where that is. And there was one time I used to accompany Patsy to a lot of meetings, and there was an event at the White House. It was a bill signing. And so we went together, and she wanted me to sit next to her, but this was in a seat for members of Congress. But we were there early. We were the only two there in that section, and so she wanted me to sit next to her. And as a staff person, it's sort of not the right etiquette. You're supposed to be in the background or whatever. But she just turned to me and she said, just stare straight ahead and just act like you belong. And I think that that said a lot about Patsy, that she knew that that she herself, as well as a lot of other women, weren't always invited to places, and so you had to have the chutzpah to get there yourself, and then basically act like you belong, even though others might not think that you do.
In 1994, when the Republicans took over the Congress, it was vastly different. And so for me, I just saw the handwriting on the wall. And so the possibility of outside other employment came up, and I decided this is a good opportunity, and so I left. Patsy, I think, is one of those who, regardless of what the water looks like, is always going to be swimming against the tide. And so, for a resolute woman like Patsy, and with her strengths, she just plows ahead.
So I sometimes think, what if Patsy Mink had got into medical school, right? And what if she had actually gone to medical school and hadn't taken the path that she did, and to some extent, to a little bit, sacrificed a lot of herself for the betterment of really everyone here in our community. For you, Kim, what are, and you talked a little bit about this earlier, but maybe if you wanted to expand, what are some of the larger lessons we can learn from Patsy? I mean, she was thrown curveballs left and right, and she kind of just embraced them to a certain extent and used them as sort of motivation to correct some of those things, so other people wouldn't have to have those curveballs. What are some of the other larger lessons you think we can learn from Patsy and her story?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just as you were saying, that she channeled these personal experiences into creating change, right? Social change. And for her, it was through legislation. Maybe for us, it can be in different ways. So for me, it's through films. So I think we can hopefully use that spirit, and then whatever it is that you do, you know, you can find your own way to be like Patsy Mink, and even just small ways. I mean, I think one of the things, and one of my favorite clips in the outtakes I shared was about the Women's Educational Equity Act, which is something I didn't include in the film, but I would have liked to. And it kind of goes hand in hand with Title IX. So Title IX mandates that there can be no discrimination based on sex in any institution that receives, educational institution that receives federal fund. But what Patsy was trying to do with WEA, the Women's Educational Equity Act, was trying to change how people saw women, right? Not just legislate that you can't discriminate against them, but change the very, like, change people's hearts and minds, and through curriculum, because it starts so young. And I think Patsy was always very passionate about education, right? She sat on the Education and Labor Committee, even before she was in Congress. When she was in the territorial House and Senate and in the state legislature, she was really an advocate for education. And I guess where I'm going with this is that we can find small ways in our lives to do the sort of things that Patsy Mink did. So like, I remember, you know, with like my kids, when we see things where, you know, like in books or on TV shows, and we see that, like, why are girls being portrayed this way and boys being portrayed this way? Then we have that discussion and conversation about it. And so I think it's just small things like that. And I think, you know, the other thing about Patsy Mink that, I don't know if it came out in the film, but she was just very close to her family. And, you know, John Mink was like her closest advisor, and Wendy Mink, and they had this like real close unit. And they were also very political, and they'd have lots of discussions together. But yeah, I guess that's where I was going with this, was just, you know, like, I think we can take that sense of not accepting the status quo and trying to find ways to make change happen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you know, for me, I hear these stories when I also talk to people. If I find out they had a conversation with Patsy, or they used to work for Patsy, I always ask them, you know, what was it like working with Patsy Mink? And I had just talked to someone a couple of weeks ago who was working with her when she was at the city council. And he didn't work directly for her, but he said that Patsy was always the last person to leave. You know, her lights were always on after he would leave work and go have pauhana and come back and see that she was still there working late hours to ensure that she would get, you know, the language right, that she would be prepared for her hearings. And that's something that I've admired as sort of this another larger lesson from her story. And I think it came out in the clips too in the actual documentary. I mean, she really did push her staff.
Yes. I mean, I honestly don't know if I could have worked for her. It would have been tough. But I admire that. And I think that's something also that I learned through the research, was that, like, she often wrote her own letters, her responses back to constituents, you know, and you would think that maybe she would, you know, have a staff person take care of that, but she read everything. And so when constituents met with her, they would often say that, they'd say, oh, I wrote to you. And she'd be like, yes, I know. And, you know, I knew all, you know, X, Y, and Z about the issue. And that she took that time, that she didn't like delegate that responsibility out. Like she really took her job very seriously and like took that responsibility seriously. And I think that's very admirable. So yeah, she like walked the talk, right? She wasn't just there for the name and for the, you know, the lights and all of that. She really believed in the work, and she did the work. Yeah. Which is kind of amazing, because I don't know how many hours in the day there can be to do all of that. So, and she wrote like a lot of her own speeches and things like that. She was just a beautiful speaker too. I mean, her oratory is amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just wanted to share, actually, I had received a letter from Patsy Mink when in the early 2000s, 2001, and it just really meant a lot that she was encouraging young lawyers and women lawyers.
Yeah. That is awesome. That is awesome. So let's switch gears a little bit, and maybe Kim, we can, you know, talk about the distribution of your film and sort of the impact that it's had. So yeah. Maybe we'll start with a question. Ruth, you want to jump in with a question?
Sure. So Kim, please tell us what has been happening since the initial release in 2008.
Yeah, so I finished it in 2008. It premiered at the Hawaii International Film Festival and won the Audience Award for documentary. And then shortly thereafter, it aired on PBS Hawaii. And then we had the national broadcast, I think in 2009, so a little bit later. And, you know, many stations played it. We had screenings, so it played in film festivals, and we had sort of more major screenings in like I mentioned, Washington, DC, and we had sort of a premiere in San Francisco as well. It's screened at like conferences like the Association for Asian American Studies Conference and the American Association of University of Women's National Conference. It's screened at the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. So yeah, I've been very fortunate that even today, I still get screening requests, at least one a year, even though the film has been out there for a while. But I think the thing that's kind of maybe the most interesting is, I get emails at least once a year from students from various parts of the United States who are doing their National History Day project on Patsy Mink and who've seen the film or want to find out how to get the film and want to ask me questions about her. And so I think that's really great, that people are finding her story. And not, all of them, I think almost all of them have been from outside of Hawaii. So just, some of them are Asian American students and some are not. But so it's still playing and it's still in distribution. It's particularly in the educational realm. So like libraries and universities and whatnot.
And what kind of reaction, feedback have you gotten? I mean, aside from some of these students, have folks, requested more? They want you to do an additional documentary?
I mean, I think some people have expressed some sentiments. No one said like, here's some funding, make a second documentary. But no, I think people are just grateful that her story's out there, and I mean, there's no way, like I said before, to compile somebody's life into an hour. So this is just one story about her. There have been other works and media about her, which I think is really great. So beyond this film, and when I did this film, there wasn't a lot, right? Like I mentioned, there's like a mini biography and there was like not too much in terms of like in one place. And I think it's great now that people are discovering her. So for instance, like PBS had a documentary series, I think it premiered maybe last year, called Asian Americans. And it was sort of this like comprehensive history of Asian Americans in the United States. And they had an episode, it was called The Good Americans, but she's well featured in that episode. And they had contacted me when they were doing the research and they wanted to like some tips on just how to find archival on her. But I was just really happy that they chose her to highlight. So I feel like there are more and more works being done about her. And of course, there's the biography. There's another local filmmaker, Dean Kaneshiro, did a film about Title IX and really sort of more of the UH Wahine athletic program and sort of their role in Title IX, or how Title IX impacted the program, our beloved Wahine volleyball program. And Patsy Mink is well featured in his documentary as well. So yeah, there's been more and more about her since this film came out.
That's great. So, sorry, go for it.
So I think there's a question that's sort of related with respect to someone in the audience is asking what they can do to keep educating the next generation of Patsy Mink's legacy and impact.
Yeah, well, you can show people the film or let them know about it, obviously. And like for those who missed the broadcast, PBS Hawaii is streaming it on their website through February 10th. So it's free until February 10th. And then you can always find, it's still in, oh, there we go. There's how you can find it. And by the way, for all of you here, there is a 10% discount, if you use this code on the screen in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Title IX. But that's through my distributor, Women Make Movies. So yeah, they distribute the film and they do it through DVDs and they have streaming. So you can find all of those through that link But beyond that, just, tell people her story, look at the other things like the biography, the other films. We can send links to some of that, put in the chat, or like email links to people after. So like my film is not the only one. So just, tell people about Patsy Mink's story. Tell them that she's the co-author of Title IX and that she was the first woman of color in Congress and that she ran for president. It's like, my favorite clip almost in the film is like when she's in the floor of the 1972 Democratic National Convention, and she's talking about, why she ran for president, and the fact that we haven't had a woman president yet. And that was in 1972. And, 30, 40, 50 years later, 50 years later, still haven't. So I think, yeah, just tell people more about her story.
Awesome. Before we take some questions, Kim, maybe, I'll speak for myself here, but the documentary was phenomenal. I still use it and share it with my students so that they know who Patsy Mink was and understand her story and legacy, and understand really the shoulders upon whom they stand when they go out and they advocate for people. What other projects do you got going on, Kim, that you would like to share with everyone here?
Oh, okay. Well, I always have many projects going on, and I'm juggling a few, but there's a common thread. So, like most of my films are the stories of girls and women, particularly girls and women of color from this part of the world, the Pacific. And so, yeah, I'm working on a couple. So the one that, is sort of the farthest out the gate that I'm hoping to finish this year, we'll see, is called Eye of the Water, The Unwritten Life of Cia Figel. And it is a story about the acclaimed Samoan American writer, Cia Figel. And it's really kind of her story of her personal journey of healing. Yeah, so I've have followed her for 6 years, and really kind of through the ups and downs as she, tries to heal from trauma that happened to her early on in life. So that film, we are at a rough cut, and we're just trying to raise finishing funds and finish it. So keep your eye out for that one. And then I'm also working on one, actually, I guess they're all listed on the screen, but the other one I'll mention is, I'm also working on a documentary about the late Chinese American writer, Iris Chang, who, was in many ways very driven, very passionate, just like Patsy Mink. She ended up writing the book, The Rape of Nanking, about the atrocity that happened in China during World War II. So it's a story about her and sort of her life and her death and her legacy. And then I guess for audiences closer to home, I'm also working on a short documentary right now about Honolulu's Chinatown and the history, looking at it today during the COVID pandemic, and also 122 years ago when we had another pandemic in Hawaii, was the bubonic plague, and how what happened to Chinatown during both pandemics, and sort of the fear and racism that came about from these public health crises. So yeah, I've got a couple things going. So people can find out more about them at my website.
So awesome. So we have, I think, a few more minutes, and then we have a bunch of questions in the Q&A. So I'll just jump in with one that I see. Do you know if Patsy Mink's story is included in public school curriculum here in Hawaii?
That is a good question. So the film, the biggest funder of the film was the state of Hawaii. I got a grant in aid. And so as part of that, I did, donate, I offered the film up to the Department of Education, and also gave copies to like the University of Hawaii Library System and the Hawaii Public Library System. So you can find DVDs at all of those locations. But in terms of the DOE, I had tried to work, so they have, DVDs are available. I don't know if they're being used and how they're being used. I'm not really part of those conversations, so I don't know. So yeah, if you're a teacher or a teacher, maybe you can ask if they're using, her story and, talking about civic education or social studies classes, or, history of Hawaii classes, or anything really. So I don't know, but I know the film was made available to the DOE. And we did develop a teacher's guide so that, there's also a guide. So if teachers want to use the film, then they have sort of some information and questions and potential activities they could do with their students after watching the film.
Great.
Kim, I see another question that is interesting. The question is, what was Patsy Mink's working relationship with Senators Matsunaga and Senator Inoue and Representative Abercrombie?
Yeah, I didn't interview any, oh no, I did interview Senator Inoue. I had a very limited amount of time with him for the interview. I mean, you know, he said, you know, it was always very cordial and things like that. I don't, you know, they seem to have you know, a good group, like those four that were mentioned. I think, you know, they were there together for quite a while. Yeah, I would have to defer, you know, to others. I don't know the details of their working relationship.
Kim, thank you again for putting this together. Any final thoughts for our captive audience here that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, wow. Final thoughts. I don't know. I think I've said a lot already. You know, I think, yeah, I think we should, especially, I think most of us on this call probably are in Hawaii, although hopefully there are some of you not in Hawaii joining us. You know, I think we should take special pride that Patsy Mink came from Hawaii and that she represented Hawaii. And I think Hawaii too is so much part of her story, right? Like, I think, you know, hopefully that in the film goes into that a bit of like, you know, her being from Maui and also just from that plantation environment where, you know, like she could see inequality around her, but at the same time, she also saw sort of the promise of things that are better. And, you know, in many ways, Hawaii is more of a multicultural society than in other places in the United States. And not that anything is perfect by far, but that people get along and you kind of grow up with people who are of different ancestry and ethnicity. And I think that very much formed who Patsy Mink was and her outlook. So, you know, I think a lot of who she was because of the place that she grew up in and also the times, right? You know, like coming out of, as Mari Matsuda said in that clip, sort of like this whole generation that kind of came out from, you know, listening to FDR's fireside chats and a sense of optimism. But in any case, yeah, just I think we should be proud that she came here and then also like try and do whatever we can to carry her legacy on. So, you know, there is a statue of her outside of the Hawaii State Public Library. It's a beautiful statue. And there's all these quotes from her around the statue and maybe like just going and reading some of those quotes and just kind of soaking in the Patsy Mink wisdom can be inspirational and help center people and figure out however it is you want to, you know, make your own positive motion forward social change.
Wonderful. Ruth, any final thoughts?
Thank you so much, Kim, for your documentary and for all your good work and for joining us today. It's been great.
For all of you, thank you again for joining us. This has been a really wonderful conversation. I would encourage all of you to attend the programs we have planned for the rest of the spring that includes more film screenings, more conversations, discussions with political leaders, with Wendy Mink, Patsy's daughter, with the first attorney who filed a Title IX lawsuit and is still filing Title IX lawsuits, and scholars to talk about what Title IX means in our community today. For more information about this celebration and other ways in which you can support our efforts to honor Patsy and Title IX, please visit law.hawaii.edu/Patsy Mink. And we hope really you have a wonderful rest of your day and a very happy Civil Liberties and the Constitution Day. And on behalf of everyone that's been involved, Kim, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for today's conversation, but also for capturing Patsy's story in a way that has touched all of our hearts and will continue to touch the hearts of so many people. We wish you all a great Sunday. Aloha.
Thank you.